Yeah, so it's always good to see you, Devin. You know,
Likewise.
I'm looking forward to sharing space and time again with you sometime in the near future. You know,
Same here, man. Same here.
but
I was
thank.
actually just talking about you yesterday.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that must be why my ears are ringing.
Oh yeah, actually, I sent because I sent the lady your email.
Right, right, right.
Mhm.
Okay, that's dope. So I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to hearing from her, you know. But just I want to really just say thank you though for taking the time because I know your schedule's busy. Mine has been busy too for just this moment to share your story on the podcast, Prison to Promise podcast. Hopefully people will hear your story and find some motivation, some encouragement, um, to know that they can do better after being incarcerated.
Yeah.
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 So
Yeah.
without further ado, man, I'm just gonna say let's jump in, man. I ask you
Okay.
to introduce yourself to the listeners and tell them where you're from and what you about.
Yeah. So my name is Devin. I'm from North Carolina. And I say North Carolina because I've lived from everywhere. Originally from a little small town in East North Carolina, Pamlico County. But I grew up in Durham, Bull City. Um, but now I currently, as an adult, I've lived in Washington, D.C. for the past several years. So yeah, and let's see what I'm about. It's so funny when people or it's weird when I try to answer that question, right? Because I really look at myself and my life and what I do as serving.
Mhm.
And so it's always interesting to hear various terms applied to like what I do, whether that's advocate or um, I've heard like activist, even entrepreneur. I'm settling into that a little bit more because now I'm doing more of the businessy things.
Right on.
But essentially, at this point in my life, I operate a social impact enterprise, Ship and Anchor,
Yeah, yeah.
and the premise behind that originally we started as a consulting firm in like diversity and inclusion and small business type things, but now we so I've kind of got my little pitch down, I guess.
Come
Hopefully it makes sense for people. But as a social impact enterprise, we really focus on three main things, right? So we work with organizations who serve or market to one or more of our four impact groups. So that's current and formerly incarcerated people, students, small business enterprises, and or Black, Indigenous people of color.
on.
And usually when we engage them, it's one of three things. That's business development, communications or messaging strategies,
Mhm.
and then other general management consulting, usually in the form of like operational support of some sort.
So if
Yeah.
we could focus in then on the particular demographic, formerly incarcerated people that you mentioned. You might have also said incarcerated, but I know you said formerly incarcerated as well. Um,
Mhm.
Can you talk about what drives your focus with this particular group over other groups? Why are you focused there versus, say, with cattle farmers or someone else?
Yeah, well, there's a couple reasons. One, that's I spent time being incarcerated. I was convicted of a felony, and it happened at a time. Well, I don't know that anyone thinks or imagines or plans to go to prison, but I
Right.
was in college at the time, in school to be a teacher. I was an active mentor to young people, to try to prevent them from going down the paths of incarceration and all these other things. And so once I found myself, as an incarcerated person and was like living it, um, and then had the, experience that I still have now of, trying to rebuild my life post incarceration, with the criminal record.
Mhm.
I was just driven to do that. And I'll say what specifically kind of ignited this like action towards that particular group was when I found the journals I wrote when I was incarcerated. like I wrote a lot. Like that was part of how I passed my time. And I've always like written. I have journals from like even second grade. But
Yeah.
after I started my business, like a friend of mine, Kevin, who we were incarcerated together, I had given him my journals because, I was transferring soon and he was about to be released and you can only transfer with so many things. And so I didn't want to have to get rid of any of my journals. So I gave it to him so that after I was out, I can get it from him. But I forgot about it. So it wasn't until like 5 or so years later in 2019 when I actually got them and then rereading it,
Oh, wow.
remembering where I was and all those
So he
things.
held on to them.
He held on to them and he reminded me,
Wow, what a good man.
yeah, yeah. Like, and actually we had connected several times over the years. And
Uh-huh.
then one day I went to Greensboro to, just visit. Well, I have family, of course, in North Carolina. So we were just visiting. And he's like, hey, I still got your journals and everything. And I had completely forgotten. Yeah.
So you got them back. That had to be great. And now you're reading them, and what happens as you're reading them for you?
Well, so when I first am reading them, right, it was kind of like an out of body experience in a way, right? Because most of those things I had forgotten about, right? Because again, in the place when I was writing them, I was really writing as a way of kind of sustaining myself, right? It was all I knew to do. Like there was one, huh?
Therapy.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Like there was,
Self-healing. Just
Mhm.
last self-healing. I listened to a brother the other day, and he said, healthy is two words: heal thy.
I love that.
Working on being healthy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
share that.
No, that's good. Thanks for sharing that. But yeah, that was kind of what it was. So for me, so I was incarcerated because I was responsible for a car accident that took someone's life. Having leaving, I was leaving the party, having been drinking and driving. Um, and so even that, I recognized, right, that even that action, what led me to drinking that night was a lot of the things I was dealing with that I hadn't really dealt with before. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? I had recently lost some loved ones in a very sudden, tragic way. My dad, uncles, cousins, those are my grandparents' only kids and our family business. It was a lot.
Yeah.
And I realized I hadn't dealt with that.
Mm.
I
That's a heavy
haven't
weight.
Yeah, and then like right after that, I was involved in a situation in school that was kind of, difficult. And so that night specifically, I went to go talk to my good friend who lived not too far away. And I intentionally was like trying to muster up the liquid courage, I guess, to be able to talk to him about some of those things that I hadn't shared with anyone before, and that had been weighing on me. And so by the time I got to prison, right, I realized like, yo, I've got to deal with these things because if I had better ways of dealing with those things, I wouldn't be in prison and someone would still be alive right now. Um, yeah.
That is so powerful what you're sharing right there. And I think about my own journey, and I think about so many other brothers and sisters who find themselves in prisons and jails or even dead because of bad decisions, excuse me, that have been associated with substance use or misuse
Hmm.
because we're trying to, I guess, deal with our emotions unhealthy. You know,
Yeah,
that was
absolutely.
me, and I know it's a lot of other people. You know,
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's why I really advocate like journaling though, because, and when I think, and well, so in, of course, I advocate for like prison reform and things, because there definitely needs to be more mental health, right? There, and most people who end up in prison, like one of the things I noticed, right, in some of the journals and things, like all of us had the commonality of having dealt with lots of trauma before incarceration.
yeah, the vast majority of us. And so, but you know, it's interesting though, also that you mentioned, you know, better mental health services inside prisons and jails. Let's imagine that there was 100% great mental health services in prisons and jails.
Mhm.
But because of the traumatic environment of prison, how much help would that be? So not only do we
Right.
need good services in prisons, the nature of the environment has to change as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, so that's why I do advocate for journaling specifically, because one, that was one thing for me, right? Um, and it's like I believe 100% that we need to be advocating for those kinds of changes in policies and rules and practices, et cetera. However, I think, while we do that, we need to also be figuring out what we can do on our own in the meantime,
Mhm.
right? Because there are, like, I know firsthand, right? Eventually when I got out, I was able to finish my degree and things, but even as a college educated person with, you know, marketable skills, I still experience all these barriers, right?
Yeah, man.
Um, and it's like, I think while we are advocating for the changes that need to be in place, we still need to be figuring out the things that we can do on our own for ourselves. And journaling is one of the things that's very low cost.
Yeah,
Um, that's very practical for most people in those situations.
yeah. So it's important to find something to keep yourself healthy.
Absolutely.
You know, it makes me again think of my own experience inside the penitentiary. I wanted to journal, but I was afraid that my journals would somehow get confiscated,
Mm,
stolen by the guards, and so I didn't want to write. But I did write letters, and I remembered things, but I couldn't have possibly remembered everything. But what I
yeah.
did to help myself is I did a lot of reading.
Mm-hmm.
I did a lot of running and calisthenics. Um, I did and what else did I do? And I helped teach. I taught a lot of people. You know, I taught guys how to read. I taught guys how to write. I was a teacher's aide. And I played a lot of chess. But all these things to keep me physically and psychologically balanced, man, in this
Yeah.
tough environment.
Yeah. No, same. I did a lot of those same things, man. Um, so yeah, like that's the way.
And you know, as we're talking about this too, Devin, I'm thinking about the importance of people being as healthy as they can be in prison, because as you and I know, most people in prison are getting out.
Hmm.
So if they're coming out unhealthy, in worse condition than when they went in, which is the case in many instances, um,
Hmm.
we are in trouble. Our society is in trouble. You know, our communities, our families are in trouble. So yeah, we need to treat people better if they're going to be in prison.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I always say this too, right? So one of like my when it comes to like social impact, right? Or impact in general, like one of my biggest lessons came from the show The Biggest Loser.
Mm,
Like I was a young person, maybe high school or something. But I remember like one of the strategies of, because like they're on teams and they're trying to lose the most weight so they can win. And I remember one team or one person saying like their strategy was you want the person who's like the most overweight on your team because they have the most weight to lose,
right.
right? And so the idea, like, as in terms of strategy, made me realize like the people that are the worst off
Mm,
offer you the most gains. Like if we focus all our energy on the smartest people, the people who don't really need as much help and support, then like the amount of increase we can get from that, I think you can always improve and increase and always. But it's still small
right. Because they're
compared
at the
to
top already.
right. And
There's not
so
much more you can get.
exactly, exactly. So by focusing your efforts on the people or situations that are the most severe, that's where you can receive the most gains,
Yes,
right?
sir.
And so that's also part of why, in terms of like impact groups, current and formerly incarcerated people are the group I focus on. Because if you look at our society, that's like literally the group that is the most marginalized, or the most like excluded from all parts of society, economic, educational, all those things. And
And
so
it's legal to do it. It's
it's
legal to
illegal to do it.
discriminate against us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so I think even when we're talking about like how we advocate for some of these things, you know, and it shouldn't come down to this, right? We should do it for the humanity of it, right? But even if you think about it in terms of like how we're now in this global economy and all these things, competitiveness. So we incarcerate the most people, right, in the world. Then if we just think about it in terms of that, is we have the largest prison population. If we then were to take that large population and flip it to where they now are able to participate the same ways in society and the economy, all those things, then that's like an advantage, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's the part that we're not looking at. Like people are putting all this energy into making it harder for
Yeah.
the groups who are most marginalized, when all that's doing is making it harder for even the 1% and the wealthy.
True. This is true. But
You know.
as you're saying that too, Devin, I'm thinking I've been hearing some murmurings. I've been in on a couple of small conversations here and there, reading some things as well. And it seems like there's a small movement of attitudinal change occurring in our state or in our nation, should I say, around including people with former incarceration backgrounds or people with felony convictions. And so there's been some talk about, this is a workforce that we're missing out on. This is a dedicated labor force that we're missing out on, and the conversation has also been what you're saying. Everyone is suffering then if the most severe cases, the most marginalized people are not being able to get what they need, because then it becomes what, maybe a public health issue because folks don't get the insurance and treatment that they need, public safety because again people can't make ends see each other, let alone meet, so they're likely to hit somebody over the head or climb through somebody's window, you
Yeah.
know and then it was also, I said, public health, public safety, and then tax dollars. There's a lot of tax money being spent on incarcerating people and
Yeah.
reincarcerating them and emergency room visits and all that. So you're right on point, man, at least as far as I can see.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, all that said, that's kind of how and why I focus my efforts, on that group in particular.
Yeah, yeah. And, I appreciate hearing that. But something else resonates with me as we talk about not just your work, but who you are as an individual. You were this young brother heading to college, or who was in college and ended up in prison, whereas a lot of folks have not been to college or completed high school and end up in college. So you're an outlier. You're one of the outliers in the prison world. You know, I got out of prison and went to college, started college in prison. But what do you think is the difference in being academically or vocationally certified or degreed, and what's the difference in having those credentials versus not having them when one is getting out of prison? Does that make sense?
It does. It does. So I believe that in its truest, most basic form, there is not a difference,
Mm-hmm.
right? But perception is reality,
Mm-hmm.
right? And one of the things that used to, it used to like drive me nuts was when people would say things like, you don't I didn't belong, I wasn't supposed to be there. And in
Yeah.
my mind, I'm like, none of us are supposed to be here.
Right.
Like, but what I realized what that was saying, what people were saying when they started to say that, is that they saw me and saw a vision for me that was better and more than prison, whereas they didn't see that for themselves. Right. And so to your question, like, how is that different? or what made it different. So I think it was that, right? The
Mhm.
whole idea about college, right, and being in college is that, you know, you are going through that process, and you know, the expectation, right, is that you are going to become and do, you know, something meaningful and impactful in the world.
Mhm.
So just that expectation, right? I think, you know, outside, because the reality of it is I actually learned like the things that I use in my work and in my everyday life that are really adding value to the world.
Mhm.
I probably use more things I learned from being incarcerated than when I was in college, right?
Absolutely.
Right. But so like just the expectation though, right? Um, is is a lot, like expectation of myself and others.
Yeah.
And again, for the outside world, the expectation, right, is a part of it. So I think that answers, you know, that part of your question.
Mhm. I think it does, and there is no particular answer I'm
Yeah.
looking for. And so I
Yeah.
appreciate the answer, you
But I
know.
also think too, like perspective,
Mm.
right? Um, and I'll say like when I say perspective, I'll say like how to think. And I think college is a part of it, but I don't want to give college too much credit for it, only
Right.
because I know so many college educated people who know what to think, but they don't know how to think, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I'm with you. And some college educated people are just damn fools.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I'm very much in this point in my life where I'm like, the world doesn't need more smart people. We have tons and tons of smart people. We need more wise people,
Wow.
right?
And people who are willing to work hard.
Exactly. And people who are emotionally intelligent and you know what I mean, culturally competent
Yeah,
and like just understand the principles of life,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And as you say these things, I reflect back to what you just said a little earlier about, I learned so many things that I use in my life every day in the penitentiary, in the yard, on the dorm, on the cell block. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking all of these lessons really came to me as well behind the wall. That's where I
Yeah.
met some of the smartest, most brilliant, most intact people, you know, making these transitions and transformations in their lives and other people's lives in what would we call it, in the belly of the beast, in
Yeah.
hot, traumatic, hellish conditions.
Yeah.
These are
Hmm.
special people, and to think you and I are part of that group
Yeah.
who to make this transformation. And yeah, we don't have to necessarily go to college or have vocational education, but we have to have knowledge of self,
Absolutely.
and that's where
Absolutely.
that emotional intelligence comes in that you were talking about.
Yeah. Because like once you get that, like it helps you know how to apply the kinds of things you learn in college,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Um, yeah. And
Absolutely.
so yeah.
Yeah. And not just the things you learn in college, it helps you just become more aware of life.
Hmm.
But man, I know we're getting ready to come up on the end of our time together. Um, and this conversation went somewhere totally outside of where I planned for it to go. And
Okay.
it's beautiful though, man. It's
Okay.
beautiful because this is what happens when you have two brothers who are familiar with each other and we just get to rapping. And so
Hmm.
it's a great conversation. But
Always.
always, every time, it's always enriching. I tell people
Yeah.
about you all the time, and I'm like, you remind
Um,
me of another brother I knew back in New York,
mhm.
younger brother, who I knew who was a student. He was working on his master's, and he ended up having to go do some time for same situation,
Mm,
same situation as yours, and he's coming up for parole this year.
mhm.
So I've been writing him for the last 6 years, and so
Yeah.
yeah, you guys, just your stories make me think of each other. But just both of you guys are brilliant, and I'm glad that you and I know each other, brother.
Likewise.
But one of the questions, thank you, brother, I wanted to ask you is that if you could, well, I have two questions, and the one is, if you could give young Devin some jewels, on avoiding that trip to the penitentiary, avoiding that car accident, avoiding whatever led young Devin there. What, if you could go back, what would you tell Devin from today if you could go back now?
That's a really good question. I feel like I think about it a lot, or regularly rather, but I haven't thought about it recently, and I feel like I've evolved a bit. So, what would I tell young Devin? Ah, perfect. The first thing that came to mind is that it's okay. Like wherever you are in life, whatever you think, whatever you feel, whatever you experience, it is okay. I think part of like college, and not just college, but just in life, we do have these expectations, right? And when they don't go as planned, you don't, whatever, it's like that reaction to it, that visceral tightening up and that rejection of it, like, and I'm noticing like even like if you think about if you're about to fall, right? Sometimes like you cause more damage by trying to resist. Sometimes like lean into it and like relax and like so like
Well,
accept it. Yeah. So like what I've learned now and what, I think would have made a huge difference is, the things you feel, the things you think, even the things that are quote unquote bad or scary or whatever, accept them first, right? Because all emotions are designed to do is to let us know something,
mm,
right? So accept it, explore it, right? That was part of what journaling was allowing me to do, to explore it for what it is, right? Good, bad, and different. And then after you explore it, feel it, go through it, from a place of non-judgment, just from like it is what it is, then make a decision
mm,
based on that, right? As opposed to just reacting,
mm-hmm.
or not reacting, right? Um,
Understand what you're dealing with first.
yeah, yeah. And
Understand how it's impacting you.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I know for me, right, at least a lot of things I just did not want to deal with, accept, etc. But once I got to the place where I had to,
Mhm.
it was like it made everything easy. Like I'll never forget the best rest I've ever had in life to this day, most memorable was the night I was sentenced, right? Because that whole time leading up to it, it was like a year that from time like the accident happened to when I was actually, sentenced and incarcerated. And of course the DA and them were like, oh, we're thinking probation, maybe weekends and the county jail, etc. But then when I was sentenced, 4 years, it was like, oh man, it was insane. But that was also the moment where I had to kind of just deal with all of it. That was the day like his family, because his family was in Mexico, right? And so that was the first time I had to like actually address his family and listen to them,
Mhm.
and I was able to speak to them. So like that was like just that moment of like accepting it, and from that moment forward, like I just had peace, I had clarity,
Yeah.
and it positioned me to where I could, do the things like the journaling and like prepare for what my life has become,
Mhm.
right? So that's the biggest and first thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's heavy. And so many things that you've been saying, I they resonate with my own experience. Like just that what you shared. It was after I was sentenced, that I really started to find peace and settle and was forced to look at my shit. What happened to me? Why am I this way? And what am I going to do to prevent myself from getting worse?
Yeah, because I think too, just the way culture is, it's really hard for people to take a real honest look at themselves, right? And that was my and I it's helped me give grace to people, right? Because I realized that experience allowed me to be able to look at myself in a very honest way that I hadn't before.
You
You know what I
probably
mean?
could not have, because this was a unique
Absolutely.
experience where you were pretty much naked and without and nowhere to go. You were at the bottom.
Yeah. And basically the same way like my dad and uncles in them passed was kind of a similar way that, I called someone else to happen the same thing, right? So like I identified with them in a way I felt as if I was them, like in that moment. So
You were
like
done.
yeah, so I had to look at myself with a raw honesty. And if
Mhm.
more people could do that, man, we all would be much more free.
It's scary though.
It's very scary. It's
Scary,
hard.
and it hurts because
It
I know
hurts.
I was in the prison cell by myself, crying as I'm going through what happened to me. Why am I like this? And a lot of people don't want to go there, especially us men.
Hmm. And nowadays you don't have to, right? There's so many distractions. There's so many things. If it's not things like substances, right? Then there are other ways to distract ourselves from doing that
So,
work.
so many. My mentor, he's Dr. Mueddin Shakur. He lives over in Turkey.
Mm,
Um, he often talks about why why we are so distracted, or just the distractions and the noise that makes it difficult for us to focus on ourselves. You know,
hmm.
and it's ourselves from which everything starts and ends. But if we don't pay attention, we're disillusioned, for most of
Yeah.
us, you
Oh,
know.
man. And can I give one more piece of advice I would give to young Devin?
Yeah.
Um, and also just be, right? We're
Mm.
human beings, right? So we're supposed to just be.
Would
And I
be.
think so many of us strive to do certain things where there's, what we want our careers to be, what we want kinds of experiences we have in life.
Mhm.
But what I have come to find and learn is like if you just be
Mhm.
whomever you are
Mhm.
being, what aligns with that person will just come,
It will
right?
come, yeah.
So I always say, like, when I was in school, I wanted to be a teacher. And so once I became a felon, I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Et cetera,
Oh,
right?
I gotta stop you. You never became a felon. You got convicted of a felony.
Touche, touche.
I'm sorry
Yeah.
to cut you off.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. Thank you for that. Because words matter. Um, but at that moment, I was like, oh man, I'm not gonna be able to be a teacher. What do I do? But one of the things I had done even before my situation was I made a mission statement, and that was to be a bellwether for education. And
Mm.
like that's part of the work I do with people now, was like make that mission statement with who you want to be, not what you want to do. Because the person that you become
Mhm.
will like those things follow. So by me making my mission and becoming a bellwether for education, whether I was in a classroom or not, I was always going to be a teacher because that's
Right.
what a bellwether for education does.
Right on.
You know?
KRS-One said, teachers teach and do the world good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it's like if you think you want to be like a doctor, okay, so what kind of person, who is a doctor, right? If you want to do XYZ with your life, well, what kind of person does that? And then make your focus on becoming that person. And then
Yeah.
those things you want to do will follow with what aligns with that kind of person. That's not
Just
something
be.
I knew.
Become, just be. And
Yeah.
again, it goes back to that emotional intelligence, that knowledge of self. I have to know myself to be myself, or else I do what other human beings are doing. And
Yeah.
that's doing things to try to find my identity instead of
Right.
being in my identity.
Absolutely.
We're in that we can manifest, but lots of times we have to clear out the crap,
Clear it out. Yeah.
place, or the scar tissue, or the
Mm-hmm.
trauma, and then we can see the light. But it's only through the dark that we can see the light.
Mm-hmm.
But one last thing I want to ask you, well, two last things. I said that before earlier, right? But one is, if you could entitle your journey as a book title or a movie title or whatever, how could you encapsulate your journey in a title?
Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of already started, right? I have a short documentary film
Mhm.
and I'm working on a book
Mhm.
based on it. It's called Letters from America's Third World.
Mhm.
Um, and so there's levels to it and layers to it. And I'll tell you why I would title it that, right? So of course I talk about the prison as being like a third world and for some obvious reasons. But at the end of the day, the third world are those invisible factors and forces that guide us, right?
Mhm.
So if we like set aside, like so in like the documentary and things, some of the work, the podcasts that are titled Letters from America's Third World, is about prison and the invisible factors that drive certain kinds of people to prison. But even outside of that context, the third world are those invisible things. So things like mental health, right? And even like faith, I would say faith. So faith has been a really big part of my journey, before, during, and since, right, in incarceration. And the way I've come to think about it lately is like most humans, no matter what their faith or spiritual background, believe in their innermost being that we are more than our skin and bones, right?
Right.
That the larger part of us is more than the things we can see and actually feel. However, we don't like the kind of attention and care that we give to our natural physical selves, we don't give to like our spiritual self or that invisible part of us,
A lot of us
right?
understand that part, or we deny it.
Exactly. And so I say those inner things, so that's mental health, like all those things that you can't really see, but they still drive us, because even things like, take emotions, for example, anger. Like you can't see anger, right? But that anger can definitely control and determine your outcomes, right? And so I would title my story like Letters from America's Third World, because I haven't mastered or figured those things out, but I realized that there is a third world, right? And all I'm trying to do, what I feel like my life is as I'm navigating through that third world, just trying to learn more of it and then share that, right? Um, Document it, right? So that I can continue to learn from it and that others can as well.
Right on. And that's our life, you know.
Yeah,
It's so that others can learn from it as we're experiencing it. I think that's part of the purpose of our life, anyways.
yeah, for sure.
Lastly, Devin, if people wanted to reach out to you, how can they reach out to you? How can they?
Yeah, man. You can reach me at email. It's kind of long. So it's dsmith at ship and anchor biz. So it's all spelled out. So ship, SHIP, and AND, anchor, ANCHOR, biz, BIZ.com. And you
Right.
can also go to the website, which is just shipandanchorbiz.com. But you can also find me on social media. I don't have Twitter, but I do have Instagram. That's at dev.dorian. So that's at DEV dot DRYAN.
Right on, man. Right on. Yo, it's been a pleasure getting it in with you today, man.
Likewise.
Can't wait for this episode to drop. I hope many people listen up, and if they do, they will definitely get I was gonna say a jewel, but a pocket full of jewels.
Ah,
You know what I mean? So
yeah.
thanks, Devin, and
Thanks for having me, man. It's always, like I said, it's always cool to like chop it up with you.
absolutely, man. You know, and with that, I'm gonna call it a wrap.